Greetings. So, from my perspective, there are two reasons why people don't behave in a way we would like them to behave, in a way they need to behave. The first reason is they're unable, and the second reason is they're unwilling. So, with respect to their being unable, what do? We train them. And with respect to being unwilling, well, that's a larger issue. It's an attitudinal issue. And it's an issue I want to discuss in relationship to planning and implementing change management initiatives. So there's a wealth of information and knowledge out there around organizational change. And there's a ton of research out there also on the question of organizational change. My curiosity in this video is to pinpoint one aspect of organizational change, and that is why organizational change fails. So there's article after article, research document after research document that focuses on the failure of organizational change. What I'm curious about is one of the topics that comes up quite often is that 70% of change efforts fail. And so that's what I want to explore. What's underneath the failure of implementing these change efforts? There are hundreds of change models, organizational change models out there. Hundreds and thousands and millions of documents, articles on change management. So what really tugs on my sleeve in looking at all this research is the number of documents pointing to the notion that 70% of change efforts fail. So this is a list of the most often cited reasons for the failure of change management. And again, my question is, with all this information, with all this knowledge, why is it that so many change management efforts fail? So my thinking is, it's not for lack of information, but maybe for lack of the right information. So the question for me really is, what's really missing in the vast majority of all the change models that we see, all the information that we have? And from my perspective, what's missing is conscious, proactive, intentional focus on the reactive emotions and feelings that change triggers. Emotions drive people, people drive change. That's my perspective. That's the perspective of lots of folks. So that's my take. Emotions drive people, and people drive change. So you may agree with that notion, you may disagree. It's no big deal. It is what it is, and you might not be sure. But in any event, what I want to ask you to do is, in this moment, is be curious about what emotions you might be feeling as you sit through this video. So what you can do is take a look at this list, maybe starting with the categories at the top, and scroll down and just see what resonates with you with respect to what's your experience right now. What's going on with you right now? Emotionally. There's no good emotion, there's no bad emotion, there's just emotion. So again, be curious, no judgment. So what do you think the emotions are telling you as you sit and sense into what you're feeling emotionally? If those emotions could talk, if they had a message for you, what might that message be? Again, it's not good, it's not bad, it is what it is. And maybe you don't know, and that's fine also. So emotions drive people, people drive change. And the one thing we know about emotions is emotions are never in the mind. The thought is in the mind, the notion is in the mind, but emotions are always in the body. So take another second or two and go look at this list and see what you might be experiencing physiologically, in your body. Are there places in your body that are quiet and peaceful, harmonious? Are there places in your body that feel tight or sore, uncomfortable, painful? Each emotion has a corresponding physiological sensation in the body. So oftentimes when we sense our bodies, we can feel the pain of anger. We can feel the hurt of sadness. We can feel the sensation of confusion at some place in our body. So, and I'll come back to this in a little while. And I always say that our body is our best barometer of what's going on in our life. If you really want to check out what's going on in your life, check your body, not your mind, but check your body. So this is just a graphic that shows the kinds of emotions that show up in the body. So I use a barometer as a metaphor for taking a reading of our sentiments around change, our sentiments around change in the workplace. It's like taking your pulse around what you're feeling, what you're sensing physiologically around change. So in this case, what is your barometric pressure? What is your reading with respect to fear and paralysis and confusion and anger, or someone else's fear and paralysis and confusion and anger, and these other emotions when it comes to change? So the thing that is missing for me, in my perspective, is a conscious focus on feelings and emotions of folks who are involved in the change process, creating the change process, or who are being recipients of the change process. And that leads me to the next question is, when you are planning your organizational change efforts, do you intentionally consider how folks might be experiencing the change effort? Fear, paralysis, anxiety, confusion, resentment, skepticism, self-doubt, confusion, depression. This is really important. And again, for me, it's one of the things that's missing when we think about rolling out a change initiative. Remember, emotions drive people, and people drive change. So when it comes to emotions, yours and or others, are you able and willing to face your emotions head on, your anger, your sadness, your grief, your confusion? And what about others? Are you able to be with others who are expressing their emotions, their anger, their sadness, their grief, their depression? Do you tend to be receptive of your own emotions and others, or do you tend to bury your head in the sand, just feeling uncomfortable with your own emotions and around others' emotions? So when others are expressing their emotions, is your go-to knee-jerk reaction to, let's get back to business? In other words, you focus on the policies, the processes, the technology, the procedures and things, so that you don't have to deal with others' emotions, and maybe you don't have to deal with your own reactive emotions. Is that kind of your fallback position with respect to your relationship to emotions? Do you come up with all kinds of reasons for not dealing with emotions rather than face emotions head on, again, yours or others? And remember, there is no reason, all things being equal, not to deal with others' emotions when we experience them in the workplace. So it's important to understand that when we haven't done personal work, we haven't worked on our own emotions, our own feelings, it's very hard for us often to deal with others' emotions and feelings. In fact, when others do express their emotions and feelings, we often feel threatened and uncomfortable. And so we look for ways to move around our discomfort. And one of the ways we do that is to put our heads down and focus on the work so that we can resist and we can feel safe and comfortable and unthreatened by others' emotions and feelings if we just focus on the work. And so remember, emotions drive people and people drive change. So there are a number of emotions that folks experience in the face of change. And I would suggest that fear, anger, and confusion are probably three of the most common, especially three of the most common when it comes to resistance to change. So not too long ago, an organization in the healthcare industry decided that it would implement a host of changes in their organization, specifically their clinical science lab. So management provided a series of sessions and meetings to the staff in order to introduce the proposed changes. Lots of charts and graphs and data and paradigms and statistics and experts to support the changes. What management didn't take into account was the high degree of threat that many of the employees experienced in light of the changes. And here's what a few of the employees had to say after the first few meetings. So our management felt that all the data, statistics, and experts needed to support the proposed changes All that data did was to entrench resistance even more. When management felt it had covered all the mental, rational, logical bases, but didn't take into account that the brain doesn't care about facts alone. So what happened is that management ended up exacerbating employees' fears, anger, confusion, and increased resistance when they intended to do just the opposite. Very common occurrence in the workplace today. So we all know the road to change can often be challenging, fraught with bumps and potholes. So my aim in this video is not to support you to eliminate the challenges, but more to reduce these challenges so the road becomes less bumpy, and in the process, to hopefully support you to view the change process in a more positive light rather than as an unpleasant, onerous task that often feels overbearing and threatening. So I'm going to offer you 4 suggestions which, in my experience, can help make the change process more palatable, more pleasant, and hopefully even more exciting by reducing the personal roadblocks that often get in the way of successful change. So the first suggestion is to understand how the brain works and responds to change and uncertainty. The brain doesn't care about facts, it cares about safety and belonging. When employees perceive change as a threat and managers never address those fears, everyone gets stuck in a vicious cycle of fear and resistance. Breaking free of this cycle starts with understanding how the brain typically responds to change, uncertainty, and stress, and using their emotional intelligence to address those fears with compassion and honesty. How the brain works. So the amygdala area of the brain is known as the emotional brain. This is where old neurons, old past programming, old emotional reactivity lights up. And it's a situation where we have a strong emotional reaction. There's a sudden onset of emotional reactivity takes over the rest of the brain. This happens in a millisecond. It's a knee-jerk reaction to something that feels threatening or dangerous. We're unconscious in a way. When our amygdala hijacks us, the ability to think is compromised. We react. Our emotional memory takes over. That's the amygdala. So the insula is known as the right brain. This is the area of the brain that is free from anger, free from fear and powerlessness and defensiveness. There's no history, there's no memory, so to speak, no experience. We are right here in the moment, right here, right now. We're not influenced by the emotional brain. Being in the right brain allows for a state of equanimity, inner peace. It allows you to be in the moment, away from past stories. It allows you to be non-judgmental and non-reactive. And the neocortex is the area of the brain where we think, we reason, we cope, and we function executively. So the question is, how do we move from the amygdala to the right brain to the neocortex? And there is no direct method. So we cannot move directly from the amygdala, the reactive emotional area of the brain, to the neocortex. Think of the last time you had an argument with someone. Your spouse, your partner, or other person was just beside themselves with anger or resentment or some type of emotional reactivity, and you're trying to be logical and rational and trying to get them to be logical and rational. Think of the last time that happened. How successful were you? Probably not very. Or you were angry, you were upset, you were being emotional, and the person across from you was trying to help you see the logic and the rationality of their side of the argument. You can't hear it. You hear words and noise and so on, but you just can't hear it. You cannot move from the amygdala side of the brain to the neocortex of the brain. It's impossible. You cannot logic your way through emotions. Think of the last time you tried to logic your way out of fear or sadness or grief or anger or resentment. It might last for a millisecond or a couple of seconds or a few moments, but it's not before long that you're right back into the emotions again. You cannot rationalize your way through emotions. And think of this common situation. While introducing upcoming changes, an employee expresses a doubt, which reveals an emotional need. You can imagine the prototypical quantitatively oriented leader or manager's response. You're not listening. Look at the facts. It's clear that we have to change. This reliance on facts fails to address another important fact. People are just not rational when they're in this emotional state. No amount of charts, no amount of data, no amount of statistics, no amount of experts is going to move them out of their emotional state. Remember, emotions drive people, and you cannot logic your way through emotions. You can scream from the mountaintops that change is for the better, but faced with uncertainty, many people experience stress, and the typical stress response blocks the exact type of higher level cognitive processes, like empathetic and analytical thinking, that is needed to embrace change. Around and around we go. Managers keep making an argument that emphasizes the change and the factual reasons for it, which only reinforces employees' fears and the emotional imperative to resist it. This is really important. Managers keep making an argument that emphasizes the change and the factual reasons for it, which only reinforces employees' fears and the emotional imperative to resist it. Remember that emotions drive people and people drive change, and that you cannot logic your way through emotions. So understanding the incredible power, the incredible charge the amygdala area of the brain has over the rational, logical neocortex area of the brain can help you be more compassionate in understanding why someone might be resisting change, to move below the words of their resistance to the feelings and the emotions. And this understanding, combined with listening and compassion in the following 2 slides, can support you and another or others to overcome resistance to change. So a couple of things before we move forward. On the timeline, you may want to go to 3 minutes 37 seconds to the list of emotions and 4 minutes 35 seconds to the list of physiological responses. And as you move forward in this video, maybe every so often ask yourself 3 questions. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I sensing in my body? This will help you to stay present to yourself and to be clear on what might be going on in you as you move through this video. And the second point I want to make is these 4 suggestions do not guarantee that someone's resistance to change will be eliminated. What it does support you to do is have an adult conversation with somebody who's resisting change, so that if they decide not to go along with the change and make other choices, that's fine. So our intention is to have an adult conversation with this person, not an adult having a conversation with an emotionally 4, 5, 6-year-old who's wearing adult clothes and an adult body. And we'll look at this in a few minutes. And that's the intention of these suggestions, to support you to work toward eliminating resistance to change and see what happens in the process. Again, adult to adult. So the second suggestion is to create an environment where employees feel comfortable speaking up and speaking out about their feelings around change. And this will include consciously and proactively initiating change effort programs, trainings, resources, which foster psychological safety. So psychological safety is the belief that it's acceptable to voice your opinion and that you won't be punished when you make a mistake. Psychological safety is hard to define, but when you're in a group that has it, you can feel it. Psychological safety is a sense of comfort and safety that liberates employees to speak up, to share ideas that challenge the status quo, or a superior's ideas, or even a company's current direction on a project. It's the willingness to share an idea that sounds a little crazy or isn't fully formed yet. It's knowing that if you try something different and it fails, you won't be chastised, unfairly punished, or fired. It's a culture that values inclusion, honesty, and reasonable risk-taking, and trust. So over the years, I've dealt with a number of managers who had a similar situation. And the situation was basically they want people to speak up and speak out. And their message was, in various ways, shapes, and forms, my door is always open. So if at any time that you want to talk about something that's going on, something on your mind, feel free to come in. Which is really kind of interesting, because the manager, from his or her perspective, is saying one thing, but the employee from a different perspective is hearing something else. The result being few employees show up to take advantage of the opportunity to have this kind of a conversation with their manager. So many of these employees, when they were children, very early on, when they wanted to or attempted to express their aliveness, their thoughts, their juiciness, their wisdom, their self, they were often met with resistance first from their parents or immediate caregivers, then from extended family, and then maybe from their teachers, perhaps the clergy and others. And this is what this resistance sounded like. So scroll down this list and see if any of these responses or flavors of these responses might sound familiar to you. This is why it's so important to understand how the brain works and how the brain is programmed and how the amygdala is programmed into feeling threatened or unsafe in certain situations. So most psychologists will tell us that most adults emotionally are 4 or 5, 6-year-olds in adult bodies wearing adult clothes. And the kinds of experiences we have in childhood stay with us well into our adolescence, our teen years, and middle life and adulthood. And when we experience negative emotions and negative reactivity as children, and we don't process that emotional reactivity, we carry it with us in our lives, right into adulthood, right until death. So when that manager says, hey, look, come on in and talk anytime you want, tell me what's on your mind, that's not what they hear. They bring along with them this kind of emotional reactivity that they experienced when they were children. They feel threatened, they feel scared. And so when the manager scratches his or her head and says, what's wrong with this person? There's nothing wrong with this person. So nobody's suggesting that you have to have a degree in psychology or a background in therapy. What's important is to have the skills and the abilities to have critical conversations with employees where they feel safe, where they feel secure, they don't feel threatened. And there's plenty of information out there, plenty of tools out there that you can avail yourself of to learn how to have these kinds of conversations with employees who you may think are difficult, hard to work with, resistant, and that kind of thing. But it's nothing less than they don't feel safe with you in the moment. It's not about them, it's not about you, it's just about the reality of their experience as a child and now their experience as an adult, where they put this overlay of a bad parent on you. And that's why they're reluctant to speak up, that's why they're reluctant to engage. So if you know how to have crucial conversations, and there's a great book out there on crucial conversations, it will support you to work more effectively with folks who are resistant to change. So this graphic just depicts the psycho-emotional dynamic that goes on in a conversation and a relationship. And this happens all the time, from morning, noon, and night, when people interact with other people. So again, when the boss, when the manager says, come on and speak to me, our knee-jerk reaction is, uh-oh, something's bad is going to happen, because when I was small, something bad happened. And for those folks who have not processed this early childhood wounding, then they carry this wounding with them, as I said before, through adulthood. And many of their interactions are the interactions of a child with an adult, not two adults having an interaction at the same time. And for many folks who are resisting change, maybe that's the dynamic that's going on with them. So having a conversation with this individual, an environment that is emotionally safe and psychologically safe and physically safe, that individual may open up and begin to explain why they feel the way they do, why they feel threatened, why they feel unsafe with the particular change that's coming. So before we get to suggestion 3, I want to make one comment. When it comes to creating psychological safety, everybody's involved. So you as leaders and managers and supervisors need to not just be involved, but you need to go first. You need to demonstrate and be the example how to express your vulnerability, how to express emotions, how to express feelings, how to speak up about things that you're not comfortable with, so that you can begin to build trust between you and all the others in your organization. So if you are one of those people who are uncomfortable with others' feelings and emotions and expressing your own feelings and emotions, this is something you may want to work on. You can't be the odd man out, the odd woman out, that you expect everybody else to speak up and speak out and say what's on their mind and express their feelings and emotions, but you're in the background. That's not going to work. It's not going to support a culture of psychological safety. So again, if you're one of those folks who is reluctant to get in touch with your emotions or share your emotions or feelings, then find somebody who can help you do that. Find somebody who can help you work with that, so that in this environment in which you're in, you're seen as a player and not as an outlier on the side. Again, that doesn't create trust. If you're unwilling or unable to create a culture of psychological safety in the face of organizational change, then a lot of the folks that you work with are not going to feel safe. So instead of having folks show up as true and real and authentic and sincere and honest, and instead of true engagement and buy-in and commitment, what you're going to get is compliance. They're going to go along to get along with the change. And compliance, as we all know, is unhealthy and unhelpful. It leads to passive-aggressive behaviors, which result in some flavor of sabotage, overt or covert, verbal or nonverbal. And before long, you're back at square one, blaming and finger-pointing because the change isn't working. And these are some of the behaviors that reflect compliance. It's passive-aggressive behavior, sometimes overt, sometimes covert. But for those folks who are not willing to buy in or not willing to engage and be really committed to the change, they often act out in ways that are self-destructive, both for themselves and the organization. So again, if people aren't buying in, if you're not working with their resistance to change in a loving, kind, compassionate, helpful way, then these are some of the kinds of behaviors that you can expect. So at the heart of psychological safety is trust, that invisible feeling that drives so much behavior. To support others to feel safe and unthreatened, connect on a personal and heartfelt level. Let folks know you're a straight shooter. You're on the level. Demonstrate your sincerity, show your empathy, compassion, and vulnerability. And that leads us to suggestion number 3. Demonstrate your sincerity, show your empathy, compassion, and vulnerability. How do you do that? You tell your story. And not just do you tell your story, but you go first. So I'm going to be quiet for a few seconds, a few minutes, and I just want you to read the following information on telling your story. So telling your story, being open, honest, and authentic about yourself humanizes you, allows your vulnerability, making you more accessible, more likable, and more trustworthy. It makes you real. People see you as a human being, and by the way, you're a leader. They see you as a human being, and by the way, you're a manager. They see you as a human being, and by the way, you're a supervisor. They want to see the real you. They want to connect with the real you. Your authentic self, your true self. And why? Because we're creating psychological safety in the workplace. And when we create psychological safety in the workplace, often we show up, warts and all. It doesn't mean you bare your soul, but it does mean that you tell the truth about yourself. You speak about your fears. You speak about your vulnerabilities. You speak emotionally. Help people feel safe. And when people feel safe with you, they'll open up with you and talk to you. They'll connect with you. And for people who are resisting change, that's one of the most important things they need is somebody with whom they can connect. Not a father figure, not a mother figure, but a real human being who look at them straight in the eye that they can connect with. And that will help them to open up, share their thoughts, their emotions, their feelings about why they're resisting change. And that will get them out of the amygdala area of their brain and into the neocortex, the rational thinking part of the brain, where again you can have this conversation adult to adult about what's going on with respect to you and your resistance to change. And suggestion 4, engage in regular mindfulness activities. So mindfulness is a type of meditation in which you focus on being intensely aware of what you're sensing and feeling in the moment, without interpretation or judgment. Practicing mindfulness involves breathing methods, guided imagery, and other practices to relax the body and mind and help reduce stress. These are some of the benefits of mindfulness activity. I'll be quiet. You can take a few minutes and see what you think. So on this list for me, with respect to resistance to change, 2 of the most important items are reducing stress and reducing negative thinking. And stress and negative thinking are 2 of the barriers that get in the way of people when they are experiencing change that seems to be challenging or uncomfortable. So on this slide, staying calm and open-minded is important when it comes to resistance to change. Reducing the inclination to interpret an uncertain environment as a threat and thus react defensively, which is what goes on with lots of folks when they are dealing with change. So mindfulness can help one, in the short term and the long term, become more open to change, reducing the pull, the charge, the force of the amygdala emotional brain on the neocortex. So these are some of the companies that use mindfulness training programs. Specifically, they use mindfulness-based stress reduction, Jon Kabat-Zinn's program, but there's hundreds of mindfulness programs out there. And if these organizations, some of them very, very white collar, very, very conservative, if these organizations can undergo formal mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness practices, well, so can you in your operation. So again, when I said it a little while ago, asking yourself, what am I thinking, what am I feeling, what's going on in my body, have you been looking for excuses not to engage in telling your story? Have you been looking for excuses not to engage in, for example, mindfulness practice? And that's well and good, that's fine, but you cannot expect to overcome resistance to change if you're not going to contribute to the processes and practices that can help you overcome resistance to change. So again, why bother with all this stuff? And the answer is simple. Emotions drive people, people drive change, and you can't logic your way through emotions. So in the process of initiating change initiatives, you know you're going to have resistance. And you can't go back to the same old playbook. Bring out the charts, bring out the data, bring out the statistics, bring out the experts in order to try and convince and persuade those who are resisting to not resist and to buy in. So if the amygdala of the brain is in control, chances are not very good that you're going to succeed in working with people to overcome resistance to change. The reason we do all this stuff, again, is to move from the amygdala brain, the emotional brain, to the right brain, which is free of defensiveness, free of all past stories, you're present in the moment, and into the neocortex, when you can look at a change initiative, fresh, with no history, no overlay of the past on what's going on in the moment. See something as new and fresh, and that's why we're doing all this stuff. So to explore ourselves, what's going on with us emotionally, psychologically, in terms of our feelings. Are we open to exploring why we're resisting? Are we open to helping others explore why they're resisting? And again, you don't need to be a therapist, you don't need to be a counselor, but you need to know how to have conversations with people who are resisting change. There's lots of information out there. You can Google how to have conversations with people who are resisting change, that very phrase, in order to work with and support people, to be committed, to buy in, to engage. And again, if they choose not to go along with the change, then they have decisions to make. But we don't want to be working with people who are passive aggressive and compliant, because that just gets in the way of psychological safety in the workplace. So I'm going to leave you with some questions for self-reflection. Take your time. Again, you might want to look at your feelings sheet. You may want to look at your physiological sensations sheet and just see how you are with these questions and give them some considerate thought. So again, thank you for taking the time to watch this video. And for those of you who are involved in the change process, I wish you lots of good luck and take care moving forward.